Hey guys, so I'm going to share a game with you. It's not a particularly long game, but I want to go a little bit deeper because what we're looking at is we're looking at the kinds of mistakes that people make in the 1400 range. Because really, when you think about it, humans don't play perfectly. You know, we're not Stockfish 3200. We can't see that far ahead. So, however far you go down the rating ladder, games are really typified by how far off that kind of perfect play we are. And I think that people make different types of errors at different levels of experience and skill, right? So this is not a perfect game by any score. The computer actually rated me 93 or something on this, but I do make some mistakes. So what I'd like to do is just run through this game that I played this morning and look for the kinds of mistakes that people play around 1400 to 1450. Okay, so my opponent was rated just over 1400 before this game. So I start with the white pieces and I play e4 and we have c6. So we're going into the Caro-Kann. d4, d5, and now my favourite f3, the fantasy variation. And the idea is that if black takes, you recapture with your f pawn and you maintain this 2 pawns in the middle against your opponent's 1. However, you do have to be very aware of this. All right, so bear that in mind as we proceed. Now, knight to f6. Now, it's tempting at this point maybe to play e5 and to kick the knight away, gain a tempo. That might be all right, but generally what you want to be thinking about at this point in the game is development. You don't want to be pushing pawns too far up the board, overextend yourself, even if you win a tempo. So it's a tempo, but it's a tempo that comes at the cost of being able to develop a piece. So clearly this is an undefended pawn, right? So what I would like to do is I would like to resolve the issue, which is that I have an attacked piece that is undefended, and develop at the same time. There's a few ways of doing this. I could bring my queen out there or there, I could bring my bishop out there, I could bring my knight there, for example. Okay, so in the end I play knight c3, defends the pawn, and also at the same time guards a few extra squares. Right? At the same time it unprotects these ones. Okay, but I'm increasing my control over the board. So this pawn is protected by my queen, this pawn is now protected by my knight, and I have a nice strong center. Okay, so far so good. Now we have a bishop to g4 check, and it's not check, it's attacking my queen. And again, we want to do a similar thing. We want to break the attack. I can't capture the attack. I could technically move out of the way, I suppose, but that would be a bit silly because wherever I go, I'm going to be blocking off one of these two bishops, aren't I? So in this case, I played bishop e2. And now we have e6, so black is now preparing to release this bishop, almost certainly to that square. So now, I capture the bishop. Okay, yeah, so this is an error. Okay, this is the first mistake by my opponent. Okay, so I've just played this, and this is some of the most simple tactics. Okay, it means I've got 2 attackers on this bishop, and it's only defended once. So they play e6, and I grab a free piece. Bishop now comes out to pin the knight on the king, and now I push e5. I suppose I'm just trying to think of the reasoning for that. Queen is defending that pawn. This knight is defended by a pawn only. I can't add another defender to this knight because it would break the queen's defense of that pawn, you see. So this queen could then come in and capture. My queen is also busy. You could argue that my queen's actually overworked at this point. So an idea could have been by my opponent, knight takes bishop, then if queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, right? But he didn't spot that. So he brings the bishop out. Now I push the pawn to kick the knight away and gain a tempo here. Knight now comes in here, so now we've got 2 attackers on this knight and only 1 defender in the shape of the b pawn. So now I push my queen up. So now my queen, I think I've covered this stuff. So I'm attacking the knight. If the knight takes knight, I've got pawn retakes. Queen can't take pawn because queen takes, bishop takes knight, pawn takes, right? So I think I'm kind of okay with there. But do you remember the Achilles heel that we mentioned when you play the fantasy variation, or you play anything that removes the f pawn? You always have to be careful about this line here. Queen comes in, queen h4 check, right? So I'm focusing on one part of the board and I ignored what was going on the other part of the board. So what should have happened here, really? I guess what I probably should have done is actually shored up this pawn somehow. Right, instead, because kicking this knight actually, what I should have said is, okay, if I kick that knight, what am I inviting the knight to do? So jumping in here, is that better for me or worse for me? And then I've got a problem, because then I've got two attackers on that knight and only one defender. So does that improve my situation, inviting this knight to come into my half of the board? Probably not. So I would probably have been better off maybe at that point, simply maybe retreating the bishop and defending that pawn. Even arguably, well, I suppose if I'd have just done that, you see, the risk is bishop takes, because the knight is the defender of this pawn, right? Then if pawn takes, then he's got knight takes. But I'm a whole piece up at this point. So maybe what I should have done is even just focused on development. Get my knight out, castle my king. Another option could have been bishop g5, pin his knight. Okay, see how he likes it, and then play the pawn move. Okay, so that was definitely inaccurate, right? So we have this, I defend, and now the queen comes in, and this is a fork. I can't really stop this. He's attacking the king's in check, and she's also attacking the bishop. So all I can really do is push g3, queen takes bishop, and now I've lost my minor piece advantage. Not good. h3 now, because this pawn is defended by the queen. But I guess actually there he could have just captured with the queen, and if I'd recaptured, knight takes, attacking my rook. So again, this is not perfect play at all by any stretch. The queen obviously is the only defender of this knight here, so the queen has to come really to one of these two squares, or even here. So it continues to defend the knight from my queen. So she goes there. Now I bring my bishop out, finally develop my bishop, which I probably should have done sooner. Putting it in the pawn chain here, making a tall pawn. And now maybe I'm getting ready to castle. Now pawn comes to g5, attacking the bishop. I simply retreat, and knight takes now the free pawn. Also means that the queens are now facing off against each other. Oops. Right. So here I think, let's swap off the queens. Knight recaptures, so it doesn't mess up black's pawn structure any further. And now I grab a free pawn. And now black grabs a free pawn. Right. I have to say I didn't really notice those free pawns. Now I castle with a threat, so the rook comes straight to d1, attacking the knight. Material is more or less equal. Black is actually a pawn up at this point. However, in compensation, I've got better development because my king's castled. I have a rook on an open file. I only have one minor piece left to develop. Black is a little way off. Black has to develop this knight and castle which way? That way, and to connect the rooks, right? And also the pawns are not fantastic on black side of the board, which I quite often find. Okay, but he does have an extra pawn. Okay, so now we have pawn to c5. I swing the knight round. So now I've got a couple of threats here. I've got a check there, and a check by a knight, if you can't capture the knight, means the king has to move, because you can't block a check from a knight. I'm also maybe attacking this pawn. Bishop's the only defender of that pawn. Pawn's the only defender of the knight. So it's a little bit messy on black side of the board. So the knight retreats, and now I come in with check. Now I'm attacking this king and two pawns. So the king can't defend both. King moves there, I grab the pawn. And he grabs a pawn. Story of the game, right? However, and I confess I did not notice this. My opponent didn't notice it, and neither did I, right? Until he did that. But then 2 seconds, 2.5 seconds, bang. Okay, we have a bishop fork. Right? So I didn't see it, he didn't see it. But now he's got to save his rook, really. He chooses not to save his rook. And now I do mess up again from this point. So I get in front and then I ease off. Okay, so first of all, obviously, grab the rook. Okay, I'm now a rook up for a pawn. My opponent now attacks the knight. Now, this is actually a fairly complex situation. This is like, Tarantino. Well, I think of it as a Tarantino. Everything's attacking everything else. Everyone's gun is pointing at everything else. So I'm attacking that knight. It's defended by that knight. He's attacking that. It's undefended, right? Bishop's not really doing anything. Okay, and my rook is attacking that knight. So for some reason, I got it in my head that I could get a free pawn by capturing the pawn. If he recaptures, I get the knight. Yeah, that doesn't sound right, does it? Okay, so I grab this pawn. He captures with the bishop, obviously, so that this knight is now still defending that. And now I take the knight and he takes back. Okay, so instead of being a rook up for a pawn, which I was at this point, so here I could simply have moved my knight away quite happily, right? And I didn't have to swap off my bishop for this knight. Arguably, with pawns, with a board this open, a bishop is a much stronger piece than a knight. So yeah, that's the kind of soggy thinking that you get at this level, right? Sometimes. Okay, so I give up my knight for a pawn, basically, and then we're in a situation now where I'm up the exchange, right? So we've both got a knight, and I have a rook for his dark squared bishop. All right. However, I would argue maybe my pawns are slightly better. My pawns are slightly better in terms of king safety, but this game is going to be decided by who gets to promote a pawn, and black actually has these two completely passed pawns on the ENF files ready to run up. So my king with his team of 3 here should be able to overwhelm this side of the board, but it might be slow. So, and also you have to argue that black has a bishop, which could be good. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, so knight comes in, 2 attackers on the b2 pawn, push, bishop comes in with check, no problem, king to b1, knight there with check. Now here I could have also gone to a1, because this is also inviting a check where the pawn can't capture because it's pinned. But he chooses not to do that, and he puts rook to c8 instead. Now, this is just a blunder, right? So the way to avoid these is to go, okay, I'm going to attack that. So my idea was put my rook on there, yeah. Then maybe my knight can come in and attack this pawn, because that pawn is pinned, right? That pawn is pinned on the king. So this pawn is actually undefended, because that is not defending it. It can't recapture, right? So what you should do is go, okay, is there anything completely bloody stupid about this move before I let go of the mouse button? Oh yes, the knight can take my rook, right? But how long did I think about that move? 44 seconds it took me to make that blunder. Knight captures rook, and rook captures knight, and now my advantage again. I've completely spaffed it. It's gone. Now, this could be quite an exciting endgame. So, for here, obviously now I'm coming for this, okay? This is a real threat, because it comes with a fork on the king and rook, and the pawn cannot recapture because it's pinned, okay? My opponent here decides to swap off their bishop for my knight. I think that's a big mistake at this point in the game. Wide open board, okay? Also notice, look at where these pawns are, right? We have pawns on both sides on the edges of the board, okay? Now what that means is bishops can go bang, 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 all right? They can grab pawns that are about to promote on any side of the board in a single move, all right? Because they've got hyperspace ability. Knights are sluggish horses, Okay, they have to trudge and dance from one side of the board to the other. They cannot defend runaway pawns anything like as well as bishops can in an open board situation when you've got pawns on both sides, both edges. So I think this was a big mistake by my opponent. Okay, and now it just seems to go downhill. My opponent starts making moves pretty quickly, and it's all over quite soon. So I attack the pawn, and now he pushes a pawn. Okay, at this point in the game, your kings should activate. All the lights should come on. They should, wake up from their slumber, because they are now arguably the most powerful pieces on the board. Rook comes across to attack a pawn. Rook defends, and I'm thinking maybe this guy's switched on right now, I don't know. Okay, so I push c4. I feel like I have to get some movement going on this side of the board, because quite honestly, I'm scared about these two. Rook comes across offering an exchange. Well, I mean, does he know he's offering an exchange? Because he's also offering a free pawn there and a free pawn there, potentially. So what would you do at this point? This is one of those key critical moments in the endgame where you say to yourself, okay, this is now about time. Not about time on the clock. This is about how quickly can my king mobilize, get into the middle of the board, get rid of a couple of pawns and shepherd one of my passed pawns, because I now have passed pawns as well, yeah? This is clearly passed pawn, up the board. And I figure, how long do I think? 8 seconds. I'm having that. Because I can see this, right? Pawn takes. Okay, now how can kingy here defend all of them? And definitely can't defend him. Right, so I figure my king can grab that, then you go to there, right? Or even here, and then off he goes. Okay, c-pawn promotes. So this is how it goes. And he's pushing his f-pawn up. He's not even moved his king. This is really, really, really not clever play in the endgame, especially for a Russian. Okay, I just come along, grab the other pawn. Now I'm 2 pawns up, and he's got nothing. Okay, so this is important. So we have opposition now between the kings. Means that these 3 squares are in no man's land. Okay, but I've just moved. Now it's his move, so he cannot come towards my king in any way. All right, he can either go that way, in which case I'll go that way as well, or he has to go off in a different direction. So he goes off b4. Right. And this is where you simply count. You can take off your socks, you can use your fingers and toes if you want, okay? How quickly, if I just ignore these 2 pawns, right? Leave them for dead. How quickly can black make a queen? Okay? Here is this maneuver. 1, 2, 3. Okay, he has to capture this pawn, otherwise this pawn can't get there. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? 8 turns black needs to make a queen. How many do I need? 1. Okay? Well, arguably I can't push that pawn yet because the king would just grab it. Okay, so 1, 2, hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and it's all over. And this is the point that my opponent realizes and resigns the game. So, yeah, I mean that is not perfect play by any stretch of the imagination, you know. So if you're thinking, how am I going to get to 1,000, 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500? Because people play so well, or they don't. They don't play so well, you know. Chess at every level is typified by the types of mistakes that you see at those levels. Right? I played an unrated game after this one against somebody rated in the 1100s, and they made totally different mistakes, right? More basic mistakes. So, what do you have to do to get to 1400? Well, you have to get your mistakes down to this kind of level on typically, yeah. So. And look, you know, I won this game and I completely blundered my rook. I blundered the exchange. I put my piece in a place where it could simply be captured because I wasn't thinking properly. Right? So don't find yourself thinking, "Oh, I can never get to that," because you do. You know, you might be 600 rated, right? And you might think, "Oh, I'm going to put my queen on that square," and then go, "No, hang on, it can be taken there. The bishop can move backwards and grab my," you know. You can do this. That's my point. And this is really the point of Chess Bootcamp. Yeah, you can improve. Take the time. And another thing is, don't fear your opponents too much, because they are human in the majority of cases. Sometimes they're not, but we can find that out. They are human. They will make mistakes. People make mistakes at every level. It's just that the further up the rating ladder you climb, the mistakes become more sophisticated, maybe smaller, but you still have to spot them. And this game was clearly littered by mistakes as well. So that's the thing. I want to encourage you to proceed with confidence. You need to have this appropriate sense of respect, and so that you think, I'm gonna come out, I'm gonna get this guy, I'm gonna let him make mistakes, and when he does, I'm gonna punish him, right? At the same time, you need to be careful and conservative with your own king's safety in particular, right? So you need to play carefully, and you will get there. Okay, so there you go. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. See you later.